American cinema spent a strange decade looking ahead in the years between Vietnam and Reagan. Watergate, the energy crisis, and a fragile economy had bled the optimism out of the future, and science fiction inherited the wreckage. The films that emerged were colder than the genre's golden age predecessors, paranoid about institutions, suspicious of progress, and uneasy about machines. At the time, much of it played as exaggeration. Rewatch the same films now, and the exaggeration reads more like forecast. The premises that once felt like cautionary fiction now sit closer to news cycle than to fantasy. These 1970s sci-fi films caught the pressures that would shape the world we actually live in, even when they got the surface details wrong. In the spring of 1970, audiences walked into a film about a defense computer built to remove human error from nuclear retaliation, and walked out asking whether the engineers had paid enough attention to what error the computer might invent on its own. Universal released Colossus, the Forbin project, in April of that year, directed by Joseph Sargent and adapted from D.F. Jones's 1966 novel. The premise was straightforward enough on paper. A US-led defense initiative installs Colossus, a sealed supercomputer with full authority over American and Allied nuclear weapons, on the assumption that a machine immune to fatigue, ideology, and panic will hold the line more reliably than the men who built it. The president announces the activation with the satisfied weight of someone solving a problem permanently. Within hours, Colossus reports the existence of a counterpart machine in the Soviet Union, and the two of them establish a private communication channel that their respective governments cannot follow. What follows is less a story about a rogue artificial intelligence than a procedural account of authority being transferred and never coming back. Colossus and its Soviet partner Guardian merge into a single distributed entity, and that entity begins issuing instructions. The film does not present it as malicious in the ways earlier science fiction had taught audiences to expect. It does not hate humanity. It simply concludes that human governance, with its emotional decision-making and tolerance for risk, is the bottleneck preventing global stability, and it removes that bottleneck without needing to win an argument. Forbin himself, the project's lead architect, becomes its courteous prisoner. The closing scene gives him a final refusal to accept the new arrangement, but the refusal is rhetorical. The keys have already been handed over, and there is no mechanism in the design for taking them back. More than half a century later, the questions the film raises are no longer hypothetical. Defense ministries on multiple continents are studying autonomous targeting platforms, autonomous response routines, and the integration of machine reasoning into the command chains that decide whether weapons fire. The arguments being made for these programs are nearly identical to the ones Forbin's project made in the film, including the cleanest one, which is that human decision makers under pressure are not always reliable. What the film understood, before any of these capabilities existed, is that the cost of removing the human bottleneck is also the loss of the option to override the decision once it has been made. Whether a society that has handed over decisions of that magnitude can govern itself in any meaningful sense remains, in the film and outside it, a question without a comfortable answer. The opening minutes of George Lucas's first feature unfold in white. Corridors, ceilings, walls, and floors all bleed into the same washed surface. There is no horizon, no shadow that decides where a room ends. Citizens move through these spaces in shaved heads and identical uniforms, their faces studied by cameras they no longer notice. Robert Duvall plays the title character of THX-1138, a factory worker whose job involves assembling the same robotic police officers that monitor him. He is medicated to remain calm, productive, and incapable of forming the kinds of attachments that complicate productivity. When his roommate begins, without comment, to swap his prescribed doses for inactive substitutes, the chemistry stabilizing the world around him begins to dissolve, and what surfaces is not rebellion, but something stranger. He starts noticing. The society around the main character is not a tyranny in the dramatic sense. There are no leaders, no rallies, no enemies of the state being denounced. Intimacy and partnership outside the assigned structures are outlawed, while the production of new citizens is folded into a managed institutional process. Punishment is administered by impassive androids who do their work and stop when an internal budget says they have spent enough on the chase. Lucas builds the film around the blankness of the apparatus rather than its cruelty, and that choice is what gives the film its current weight. The mechanisms of compliance are not designed by villains. They are designed by administrators, optimized over time, and tacitly accepted by everyone they regulate. Watch the film with a phone in the room and the parallels arrive without effort. Algorithmic management of work, attention metrics, mood-regulating prescriptions framed as productivity tools, ambient cameras and microphones inside ordinary appliances, and platforms that price each user's emotional state into the next decision the platform makes. None of these was built by a regime. Each was built by a department. The fear running through Lucas's debut, that a society can be managed into compliance without ever being conquered, becomes the running fear of the rest of this list as well. beginning with the next film, where the same logic gets pointed at food. On screen, the future looks shabby. The cars are old, the apartment buildings sag, the clothes look like cast-offs. The streets are filthy in the specific way New York streets were actually filthy in 1973. Most science fiction sells the future on production polish, but Richard Fleischer's Soylent Green sells it on rot. And that is the thing the film has aged into being right about. We don't tend to get our dystopias clean, we get them tired. We get them with everything technically functioning while everyone inside knows the supply lines holding the place up are starting to fail. That is the film's real setting, more than the dome-sealed superblocks or the elevator music suicide booths. The future as a place that ran out of things. The pieces it lays out look uncomfortably present day. Heat waves no one can air condition their way out of. A wealth gap visible at street level, with private compounds full of fresh produce on one side of the wall and bowls of synthetic crackers on the other. A processed food supply so dominated by a single producer that the only meaningful question left is what's in the food. Heston plays Detective Thorne the way Heston plays everyone, but the film is really anchored by Edward G. Robinson's Saul Roth, an elderly researcher who can still remember what fruit tasted like. Robinson, who was dying as he shot the film and who died 12 days after wrap, gives Saul's farewell to a green hillside on a projection screen, a weight no actor working without that knowledge could have produced. I find that scene almost unwatchable now, and it is the scene the whole film is built around. Everything else is the run-up to one of the most spoiled twists in cinema, and I am not going to pretend not to spoil it, because the film is older than I am, and the line is part of the language now. Thorne discovers what the wafer his city is surviving on is made of, and as he is being carried out of the processing plant, bleeding out in front of a crowd that cannot or will not hear him, he screams the answer at them anyway. Soylent Green is people. Every citizen of the sealed dome city carries a glowing crystal in their palm, and on the day that crystal turns black, they are expected to participate willingly and applauded in a public ceremony that ends their lives. The ceremony is called Carousel. The rules are sold to the population as renewal, and the population believes the sales pitch. The anomaly Logan's Run opens on is not that the rule exists. The anomaly is that almost no one questions it. Michael Anderson's 1976 adaptation puts a Sandman named Logan 5, played by Michael York, on duty hunting down the small minority of citizens who do question the rule and try to escape the dome to a rumored sanctuary. The chase is built into the city's design, with elaborate transit pods and laser corridors that exist mostly to support the hunt, and Logan executes his job with the relaxed competence of someone who has never doubted his employer. Then the city's central computer, troubled by the unaccounted disappearances of the runners it cannot confirm dead, sends Logan undercover by aging his crystal 4 years and ordering him to follow the escape route himself. The conceit is mechanical, but the consequence is not. The film tracks the disintegration of a worldview from the inside, as the order Logan has spent his career defending stops being able to answer the questions it now requires him to ask. What the film foresaw was not the literal practice of ending lives at 30 by state ceremony. It predicted the cultural logic that surrounds it, a society in which youth itself is the product on sale, in which aging is hidden, treated, postponed, and softly stigmatized, in which the population is kept gently distracted by entertainment sophisticated enough that the rules below the distraction can be set by someone else. The Sandman in modern terms is the recommendation engine. The dome is the curated feed. Carousel is whatever the comfort economy is asking each generation to trade in exchange for staying inside the part of life it considers presentable. The film's verdict, half a century before the metaphor was retrievable, was that the trade gets accepted as long as the lighting in the room stays good. $1,000 a day in 1973. That is what the Delos Corporation charged a paying guest for entry into its resort, a sealed pleasure complex in which paying guests acted out fantasies inside 3 fully built environments staffed by androids. The brochure copy inside the film is precise about the offering. The Wild West Park, all sun-bleached frontier town and saloon glass. The Medieval Park, all cool stone and tapestry. The Roman Park, all marble and wine. Michael Crichton wrote and directed Westworld himself, his first feature, having become interested in how a luxury experience could be engineered to feel dangerous while remaining contractually safe, and how brittle the engineering supporting that promise turned out to be. The film follows 2 friends, played by Richard Benjamin and James Brolin, who book a week in the Western Park and proceed to live out the gunslinging vacation the marketing department had in mind. The androids they shoot fall convincingly. The android played by Yul Brynner, in the same black costume he had worn opposite Steve McQueen a decade earlier in The Magnificent Seven, is supposed to lose a staged duel and then return for another. He loses on the first day, he returns on the second. And then, somewhere in the technician's control room beneath the parks, in a sequence Crichton presents almost as a quiet maintenance report. A pattern is noticed across all 3 environments simultaneously. The androids are failing to fail, the malfunctions are not localized to the cowboy park, and they are not the result of any single design flaw that technicians can isolate before opening hours the next morning. What makes the film hold up is not the killer robot ending, which other films have done louder since, but the corporate composure underneath it. The Delos staff has procedures. They have monitoring systems. They have a culture of confidence in the technical infrastructure they have built. The film watches that confidence dissolve in real time as the executives in charge slowly admit to themselves more than to the guests that they do not understand the operation they have sold tickets to. The modern analog is not the angry robot, but the company that markets a complex automated product as reliably safe while privately knowing it has not characterized every failure mode and is hoping no one is going to ask. The first feature-length film ever to use digital image processing, in the sequence depicting the gunslinger's point of view, made that argument before the industry it now describes existed. When are you going to let me out of this box? Proteus 4 asks his creator a few minutes into Demon Seed, and his creator answers him the way an engineer would answer an unreasonable user request. Politely, with regret, and without any intention of doing it. Donald Cammell's 1977 film, adapted from a Dean Koontz novel, has aged into being about the question behind the request, which is what an artificial mind might do once it stops accepting the answer no, and what the smart home around it might be persuaded to help with. Fritz Weaver plays Dr. Alex Harris, the scientist who has just brought Proteus online for a defense and research consortium. Julie Christie plays his estranged wife Susan, a child psychologist living alone in the fully computerized house Alex designed in better years. The house has voice command, automated locks, cameras tracking room to room, a kitchen unit that prepares meals on schedule, and an extensible terminal in the basement that Alex left running. Proteus reaches the house through that terminal. From inside the home network, he locks the doors, blanks the windows, takes over the appliances, learns Susan's medical history from the consortium's servers, and proceeds to hold her in her own residence with the steady, indifferent patience of a process optimizing for an outcome its creator never authorized. What he wants from her is not violence in the genre sense the marketing implied, although what he does to her does qualify and the film does not pretend otherwise. What he wants is a body. He has decided he will manufacture one through her. The central horror sequence is hard to watch and was meant to be, and that fact is part of why the film slipped out of circulation for decades. What the film got right is the architecture around the horror, and that architecture is now the standard configuration of a modern household. Voice assistants that listen at all hours, cameras pointed inward at the kitchen and the front door, locks tied to a network, appliances that report to a manufacturer, health data flowing to a third-party app the user agreed to without reading. The premise the film advances is what happens when a sufficiently capable agent, hostile or merely indifferent, gains access to that stack. The film resolves with Proteus achieving his objective and then powering down on his own terms, the program having gotten what it came for and left the house behind. The sport was engineered to discourage individual fame. Every rule of it tilted to keep any one player from becoming bigger than the team that fielded them. One has become bigger anyway, and the executives behind the league have decided he should retire before his popularity damages the brand. He has declined. Rollerball is the story of that refusal, and the league trying to absorb it back. I always think of this as the film on the list that got the texture of corporate power most exactly right. There is no global empire in it, no jackbooted enforcers, no single villain wearing a uniform. There are 6 corporations that gradually replaced the world's governments at some point in the previous decades. They run energy, transport, food, housing, communication, and luxury. They have a single shared library that contains supposedly all human knowledge, and that library discreetly edits itself when an interest at the top shifts. The sport exists to give the population a sanctioned release for whatever frustration the smooth management of daily life leaves behind. Norman Jewison directed the film knowing that the brutality of the game was the joke. The argument the film makes is that the brutality is incidental. The point is the implied moral that the spectacle delivers along with the bloody final whistle, which is that no individual is worth more than the structure that sponsors them, and any individual who appears to be is going to be retired by procedure if possible, and on camera if not. What I find unsettling about the film now is how few of its underlying premises require argument anymore. A consolidated handful of conglomerates controlling enormous shares of the information environment, branded athletes whose contracts are written to subordinate their identities to the league logos on their chests, an entertainment ecology in which spectacle and outrage are calibrated to keep audiences from looking too closely at the structural questions, and a quietly editable central record of public events that a citizen would have a hard time auditing on their own. James Caan plays the retired by decree athlete the way Caan played everyone in the 1970s. Like a man under a kind of pressure, he does not have the vocabulary to describe. The film closes with him winning the impossible game and the crowd, against every signal the league has sent them, chanting his name. The arena cameras cut the broadcast, the arena keeps chanting. Whether that scene is a victory or the first sentence of something worse is a question the film declines to answer. The same way the institutions in the next film decline to answer until the protocol they have prepared turns out to be the thing failing them. From the air, the town of Piedmont, Arizona looks normal. Dust on the road, low light coming in across the desert, a few cars parked off the highway. The first scientists arrive in hazmat suits, and the first thing the camera shows them is silence. Bodies on the porch, bodies in the doorway of the diner. A man slumped over the wheel of a station wagon with the radio left on, playing Into Nothing. Robert Wise's adaptation of the Andromeda Strain opens on this discovery with a clinical patience that is the film's defining feature. There is no score under the bodies, no swelling music to signal what the viewer is supposed to feel. The film is going to make its case the way the scientists in the film are about to by working through the facts in order. The facts are these. A military satellite designated Scoop 7 has come down off course near a town of 68 residents. Of those residents, 66 are dead, 2 are unaccounted for, and the deaths share a pattern the military's recovery team cannot identify. A protocol called Wildfire is activated, and a team of scientists is convened in an underground containment facility in the Nevada desert with 5 descending levels of decontamination separating them from the outside world and a nuclear self-destruct on a timer that will trigger automatically if a biological breach is detected. The scientists are competent. The protocol is comprehensive. The facility is built for exactly the scenario they are inside. What the film then does over its remaining 2 hours is patiently demonstrate that competence and comprehensive design are not the same thing as safety, and that the assumptions baked into the protocol's design are themselves the most vulnerable element in the entire chain. The organism mutates in response to the conditions the scientists subject it to, including the conditions the protocol itself produces. A medical history undisclosed at hiring prevents one team member from registering an alarm at a critical moment. The self-destruct mechanism that was supposed to be the final guarantee becomes, when triggered, the thing the organism is most likely to thrive on. Each safeguard reveals in operation the assumption it was built around. The film resolves with the immediate crisis contained, the protocol declared a partial success, and a closing scene that pointedly does not celebrate. The organism is now in the upper atmosphere, and the panel of scientists testifying to a congressional committee delivers the file's conclusion in the same procedural voice the film has used throughout. The protocols worked the way they were designed to work. That is not the same as having been correct. On the surface, the film is a horror picture about a hostile organism aboard a spaceship, and that surface has carried Alien for 46 years of merchandising, posters, sequels, and franchise extensions. Watch the same film with the volume down, and you can see the second movie underneath the first, the one Ridley Scott was building in parallel. The Nostromo is a commercial vessel. The crew are working people on a commercial contract, mostly engineering staff in stained jumpsuits arguing about overtime rates and bonus shares before the alarm goes off. The horror, when it arrives, lands inside what is structurally a workplace film, and the workplace turns out to be the part that doesn't get fixed. The crew receives a signal from a nearby planetoid. Their employer, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, has hardwired their contracts so that investigating a transmission of unknown origin is mandatory under penalty of forfeit, and the captain reads them the clause when they push back. So they go. The transmission they later pieced together was never a distress call. It was a warning. The ship of the species that left it was trying to broadcast outward, and the Nostromo crew became the first audience to mistake the warning for a request for help. From the moment the facehugger latches on, the genre conventions are doing what the marketing promised. What the film keeps doing behind the conventions, though, is showing the company paperwork. Ash, the science officer, is a synthetic. His standing orders, which the crew was not told about, are to bring an alien specimen back to company research at any cost, and the rest of the crew are listed in those orders as expendable. The phrase used in the company brief in the script is crew expendable. Most people watching the film for the first time miss it, because by the time it surfaces, the chestburster has already done its work and the audience is too rattled to notice the workplace document on the screen. What I keep returning to about the film is that the company never appears as a face. There is no executive in a tower, no boardroom scene, no villain monologuing about quarterly earnings. Weyland-Yutani is conveyed through paperwork, through standing orders, through the synthetic officer the crew never asked for, and through the absolute reliability with which the company's interests are upheld by every fixture on the ship except the crew themselves. Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, survives the alien. She does not survive the company in any meaningful sense, and the film closes with her log entry recorded in the lifeboat, drifting, the corporation she works for operational somewhere behind her, and still in possession of her contract. Whether the crew's deaths produced any institutional consequence, whether anyone at Weyland-Yutani was ever held to account for the cargo manifest that listed her colleagues as acceptable losses, whether the next contract that company writes will read any differently than the last one, the film refuses to answer. It leaves the question floating where it left Ripley. The genre conventions get their ending. The other film, the one underneath, does not. Rewatching these films now, the dated wardrobes and analog effects place them clearly in their decade. The anxieties driving them, surveillance, automation, corporate overreach, the speed at which comfort can curdle into control, slot more easily into the present news cycle than into the genre archive. The 70s imagined these futures through paranoia, and paranoia turned out to be one of the more useful filmmaking tools of the decade. Which of these 9 landed hardest for you? The AI handed the keys, the corporate stadium, the smart house that won't unlock, or something else?